Have you ever found yourself in an unexpected moment where life seemed to change direction right before your eyes? They Were Left Alone in the Elevator is a story about unexpected encounters, deep connections, and the mysterious paths that destiny leads us down. Follow Sarah and Nathan as their lives cross in a simple moment that might change everything. If you enjoy stories of romance, emotion, and that touch of mystery, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Join us on this journey and discover what happens when two strangers are left alone in the elevator. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any chapters. Like if you believe life has its own surprising ways, get ready for the emotion. It was a summer afternoon, hot enough to make people seek shelter in the air-conditioned comfort of large office buildings. Sarah was late, as always. She ran down the halls of the office building, trying to catch the elevator, but as always, the doors closed right in front of her. She sighed, frustrated. Looking to her side, she saw a man in a dark suit with blue eyes and slightly disheveled hair. He too was trying to catch the elevator. "We'll have to wait for the next one," he said with a smile, not overly enthusiastic. Sarah didn't immediately respond, just gave a quick nod and stepped aside to wait. Time seemed to slow down a bit, as if the universe had decided to freeze that moment so she could observe him more closely. The man seemed lost in his own thoughts, but what made her look twice was the subtle hint of confusion on his face. He seemed so ordinary, but at the same time, there was something about his presence that unsettled her. He glanced at her briefly, and for a moment, she thought he might be thinking the same thing. When the next elevator arrived, they both stepped in. There were no words during the brief ride up to the 15th floor where Sarah needed to go. The silence was almost tangible, yet oddly comfortable. When the elevator stopped, Sarah took a step forward, but hesitated for a second. The man looked at her with a shy smile. "I hope your day gets better," he said softly. "I hope the same for you," Sarah replied, not quite knowing what to say, but feeling a strange connection in the air. The elevator doors closed, and Sarah stood there for a moment, looking at the numbers on the wall. Something was about to change. The rest of Sarah's day passed like a series of meetings and emails. Nothing too interesting, but the image of the man in the elevator lingered in her mind. There was something about him, something she couldn't explain, that made her think of that short but unusual interaction, something that felt unfinished. She arrived home later after a long day and found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror. Maybe it was the routine that left her unsatisfied, or maybe it was the feeling that there was something more just out of reach. Something like the man from the elevator, with his blue eyes and a smile that seemed like it belonged to a dream. But it would be strange to look for him, right? They were strangers. They had nothing in common. She let out a long sigh, shaking her head. What would happen if she went after him? But once again, something inside her urged her to do exactly that, something she couldn't ignore. The next day, as she walked down the office hallways, her eyes landed on the elevator door. She hesitated for a moment, but as she heard the doors open, she stepped in, and there he was, the man in the dark suit, standing, waiting. They exchanged a brief glance, and the silence that followed felt different this time. There was something new in the air, something more intense. As the elevator rose through the building, the hum of its machinery seemed to drown out all other sounds. Sarah couldn't help but feel an odd sense of tension between them. She glanced at the man out of the corner of her eye, wondering if he felt it too. His eyes were focused on the numbers above the doors, but there was a flicker of awareness in his posture. He knew she was there, and he was aware of her. "How's your day been?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The man turned his head slightly, his lips curling into a small smile. "Busy, just like everyone else's, but at least it's almost over," he said, his voice calm and steady. Sarah nodded, unsure of what to say next. The elevator's ascent continued, and the moment seemed to stretch on, each second thick with the unspoken words between them. And then, without warning, the elevator jolted to a stop. The lights flickered. For a brief moment, it was as if the world had stopped turning. "Did we break down?" Sarah asked, her heart racing slightly as she glanced at the man, whose calm demeanor seemed to soften just a little. "Looks like it," he replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But it happens, we'll be fine. The pause stretched on. For the first time since they'd met, Sarah felt the air between them shift into something deeper, something neither of them expected. The air in the elevator grew thicker with each passing second. The sudden stop had caught them both off guard, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah felt her heart beat faster, her mind racing. It wasn't just the broken elevator. It was something else. The way the man's presence seemed to fill the small space, the way their bodies were so close yet so far apart. The man, whose name Sarah still didn't know, shifted slightly. "It'll be a while before they fix this, won't it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the situation. Sarah nodded, still unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, probably," she murmured. "Not the best timing." The silence returned, heavier this time. It felt like the walls of the elevator were closing in, but it wasn't the cramped space that made her feel confined. It was the unspoken tension between them. She glanced over at him again, and for the first time, she noticed something she hadn't before. His eyes weren't just blue, they were deep. There was a story behind them, a complexity that made her wonder. What was it? He caught her staring, and instead of being awkward, he gave her a soft smile. "You know," he said, "I never imagined I'd be stuck in an elevator with a stranger, but it doesn't seem too bad." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. There was a warmth in his words that disarmed her. She smiled back. But the words she wanted to say about how strange this whole situation was, about how it felt like they were somehow meant to be here together in this moment, stuck in her throat. "Do you always talk to strangers in elevators?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He chuckled, his laughter low and genuine. "Only when they don't mind," he said, locking eyes with her. For a moment, Sarah realized that they weren't just two strangers anymore. They were two people caught in an unexpected moment, one that could either go nowhere or change everything. The seconds ticked by like hours. Despite the steady hum of the elevator's quiet mechanics, everything felt intensely alive. Sarah could feel her pulse in her ears, her thoughts racing, trying to figure out what to say next. But there was something about the silence between them now that felt almost comforting. It wasn't awkward anymore, it was different. The man's presence didn't feel overwhelming, it felt necessary. After a long pause, Sarah shifted her weight, breaking the stillness. "So what's your name?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended, but somehow it seemed right to ask now. The man looked at her, his eyes momentarily flickering with something almost like surprise. He hesitated, but then his smile returned. "Nathan," he said simply, extending his hand. "Sarah," she replied, shaking his hand with a brief, almost hesitant touch. "It's nice to meet you, Nathan." Nathan nodded. "Same here," he said, his tone warm but with an undercurrent of something more, something unspoken that neither of them dared to address. They both stepped back, giving each other a bit more space, though the connection they felt lingered. Sarah wasn't sure what was happening. The initial discomfort she had felt about the situation, being stuck in an elevator with a stranger, had somehow melted away. "What do you do, Sarah?" Nathan asked, leaning against the elevator wall as if this were just a normal conversation. "I'm a marketing manager," she replied, her tone softer than usual. "What about you?" "I'm in finance," Nathan said, shrugging slightly. "Nothing exciting, but it pays the bills." Sarah chuckled, her mind still tangled up in thoughts of him. There was something oddly magnetic about him. It wasn't just his looks, though he was handsome enough. It was his calm demeanor, his easy way of being. She found herself drawn to him in a way that was almost inexplicable. The conversation flowed more easily now. They talked about their work, their lives, the things they enjoyed, and the things they didn't. In that small space surrounded by the soft whirring of the elevator, they both began to open up in ways they hadn't expected. "I never thought I'd be having such an interesting conversation stuck in an elevator," Sarah said, her lips curving into a smile. "But here we are." Nathan's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Yeah, life is full of surprises." And as the words left his mouth, the elevator suddenly jolted back to life, the familiar sound of the doors dinging as they slid open. "Well," Sarah said, feeling a strange reluctance to leave the space they'd shared. "I guess this is where we part ways." But Nathan didn't move. "Maybe not," he said, his voice lower now, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe this is just the beginning." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him, uncertain of what he meant. But for some reason, she wasn't scared. She was intrigued. The elevator doors opened, but neither of them moved immediately. The world outside seemed like it was a distant reality, as if they were still suspended in that small, intimate space where time slowed down. Sarah hesitated, wondering if this was truly the end of their encounter or if it could turn into something more. Nathan, too, seemed unsure. He stood there, his hand still slightly raised, as if he were about to step out, but his feet stayed rooted to the floor. For a moment, it felt like the world outside was just noise, insignificant, distant, irrelevant compared to what was happening between them. "I don't want this to end," Nathan said softly, breaking the silence. His voice had a weight to it, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Sarah blinked, surprised by the rawness in his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart suddenly racing again. Was he suggesting something more? Something she hadn't anticipated? Nathan let out a deep breath, taking a small step closer. "I don't know what it is about you, Sarah, but there's something here. Something I can't ignore. And I don't want to let this moment pass without at least knowing what it could be." The air between them felt electric now, thick with the unspoken. Sarah's mind raced. She had only known him for what, 10 minutes? And yet, it felt like an eternity. She was drawn to him in a way that made no logical sense. This was crazy, wasn't it? But her heart knew what her mind was reluctant to admit. She didn't want to walk away either. "Maybe this is crazy," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't want it to end either." Nathan's eyes softened. There was no hesitation in his gaze now, only something deeper, something undeniable. "Then let's make sure it doesn't," he said, his voice steady and confident. The doors of the elevator dinged again, but neither of them moved. The world could wait for a little while longer. Nathan took another step closer, his hand reaching out, brushing against hers. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it carried with it the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between them. And in that moment, neither of them could deny it any longer. There was something between them, a connection that neither time nor circumstance could erase. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" Nathan asked, his voice gentle but full of hope. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him for a long moment, her mind swirling with questions, doubts, and possibilities. But despite the uncertainty, she knew one thing. "Yes," she said, her voice clear, her smile genuine. "I'd like that." The evening unfolded like a quiet dream. After leaving the elevator, they walked to a nearby cafe, the dim streetlights casting a soft glow over their path. The city around them buzzed with life, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she was in her own little world. It was just her and Nathan. The noise, the distractions, the expectations, none of it mattered anymore. They found a small table by the window, the soft hum of the cafe filling the air around them. As they sat down, Sarah found herself stealing glances at Nathan. His eyes had softened since their first meeting, and his smile, gentle, sincere, was something she hadn't expected. It was as if the guarded walls he had built around himself had started to come down, and in that moment Sarah realized that she too was letting down her defenses. "So, how does someone like you end up stuck in an elevator?" Sarah asked, her voice teasing, trying to lighten the mood. She needed to know more about him, who he was, what made him tick. Nathan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "I guess I've always been in the wrong place at the wrong time," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But that's life, right? You never know when a small thing like an elevator ride could change everything." Sarah smiled, her gaze flickering away for a moment. "I know what you mean," she said softly, her fingers playing with the edge of her glass. "It's like we're all just waiting for something to happen, something to pull us out of the routine." Nathan studied her for a moment, his expression shifting to something more serious. "What about you, Sarah?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "What are you waiting for?" Sarah felt the question settle into her chest, heavy and unexpected. It was the kind of question that made you stop and think, really think about your life, your choices. She hadn't been asked that in a long time. "I don't know," she replied after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I've been waiting for something like this, something real, something that doesn't follow the script." Nathan's gaze softened even further. "Maybe we're both waiting for the same thing." The connection between them felt undeniable now, woven into every glance, every word. It was as if they had always been meant to meet, as if this moment was simply the first step of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. But Sarah knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to let it go. Not now. Not after everything that had led them here. As the night wore on, Sarah and Nathan talked about everything and nothing. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of comfortable silence that only happens when two people are truly connecting. The cafe began to empty out, and the city outside turned quieter, the lights of the streets casting long shadows across the walls. It felt like time had slowed down for them, as if the world had decided to give them this one perfect moment. The deeper they spoke, the more Sarah realized how much they shared, how much they were alike in their desires, their dreams, and their fears. Nathan spoke about the pressures of his career in finance, the way he had been taught to follow the rules and stay within the lines. "But I don't know," he confessed. "It's like I've been playing a game for so long that I forgot what it felt like to step off the board." Sarah could relate. "I think I've been doing the same," she admitted. "Marketing was never my passion. I've always felt like I was just doing it because it's what I was supposed to do. But now, I don't know. Maybe I'm ready for something different, something that's real." Nathan's gaze softened. He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Maybe this is it," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "Maybe this is the start of something real, something different." The warmth of his hand in hers sent a shiver down her spine. She looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in his expression, and something deep inside her stirred. She had always believed that life followed a certain path, one that you had to stick to, no matter what. But now, sitting here with Nathan, she realized that maybe the path wasn't as rigid as she had once thought. Maybe it could be something more. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," Sarah said, her voice steady with newfound certainty. "I don't want to settle for the same routine anymore. I want something more, and I think you're a part of that." Nathan squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet understanding. "I think you're right," he said. "Something more, something real." The moment between them stretched, the air charged with possibility. They both knew that what had started in that elevator was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would unfold slowly, over time, but with the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine before. As they stood up to leave, the night air was cool against their skin, but Sarah felt warm, alive, and ready for whatever came next. Together they stepped into the unknown, hand in hand.